Hi guys, it's me. So we're going to be going over chapters 14 and 15 right now. All right, I'm using a microphone this time, so you may have to turn down your sound or turn it up. I'm not really sure. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me well. All right, so we are moving into adolescence. Finished up our middle childers last week, and adolescence, according to the book, is ages 11 to 18. So, as I said, I kind of like to push that middle childhood maybe a year or so, but whenever kind of puberty starts. But I do think that this begins definitely, as we're talking about adolescence here, with puberty, and as they get into older middle school and then high school. So think about those years. Think about what that means. What really designates someone to be an adolescent and what adolescence is. Think for a moment about when I say that word, adolescence, what is the first thoughts that come to your mind? What was your adolescence like? How could you describe yourself or those you knew in those time periods? And also, take a look at this word, adolescence. That is the time period. If we took out this CE and we put a T, that's the person. So try to keep those clear in writing, okay? So really think about that. I've had students say things like chaotic, dramatic, fun, crazy, hormonal, emotional, lots of different words like that. Words that is like, wow, how did we ever survive it? But let's begin to look. So first we start about puberty. Now we think about this, okay, as being like that adolescence starts at 11, 12, 13, but the truth of the matter is puberty actually can start at about age 8. We don't see it. We don't think it's starting because it first starts with changes in hormones. And this, this time period lasts 3 to 5 years, many years required to achieve psychosocial maturity, but we see it starting at about 8. It can start about 8. It can certainly be a little bit later than that. But it's when the hormones start. And so we don't see it because we usually think about puberty starting with menarche or spermarch for females or males, and the onset of that. But that kind of comes last, actually. Average menarche for girls, about 12 years, 8 months. That's your first period. Average spermarch for boys, just under 13, kind of first ejaculation. So we think of puberty as starting in those time period, at that moment. But we know that there are other things that have started to happen before then. Little body changes and hair growth and deepening of the voice might be first for boys, things like this. So it begins with these hormones increasing. And the interesting thing is in a lot of different places, we have talked about this HPA axis. This is really the first place that the book talks about it. And what we've talked about it with and understanding that in 0 to 2, all the way into 0 to 2, when we were getting the architecture of the HPA axis with that right brain to right brain connection, was that stress regulator. That the HPA axis is a lot about cortisol regulation. But it also does a lot, so it really ramps up here in adolescence because these hormones regulate a lot of things: hunger, sleep, mood, stress, sexual desire, reproduction, and puberty. So they start all of that hormone production. The hypothalamus gets the signals from maybe the amygdala and the hippocampus and the brain telling it what hormones need to be increased. And then it sends that information to the pituitary and the adrenals, and they make those hormones and start sending them out. So abnormalities in adolescence of this axis is when we start seeing anxiety, depression, and eating disorders. So way back in 0 to 2, we talked about how almost all psychopathologies see dysregulation in this axis. And it really can show up at this time period with all of these hormones and in puberty, kind of a lot of things changing, and so dysregulation of that can really start to show up. So what are these sex hormones? Which is another one that comes online, which we haven't seen before in terms of the hormones that are going to start running. Gonads produce hormones and produce the hormones in the gametes. So these are in the ovaries in females, testicles in males, and So this HPG axis, hypothalamus to the pituitary to the gonad, so it's just a different running of the hormonal information and messaging to turn these things on, to produce these hormones, produced estradiol, which is the estrogens, and the testosterone. So this is for, these are very sex specific, and we see more of the estrogen in females and more of the testosterone in the males. So I just want you to think about these hormones, and we have 12 and 13-year-old kids getting kind of an onslaught of estrogen or testosterone. And so you think about it for yourself and adolescents. And what do we think about when we think about estrogen? Well, it can be a little emotional, or think about girls and adolescents. Emotional, emotions running high, wanting to connect a lot with friends and boys. And now, think about the middle school. Our middle childhood kids were already worried about where they fit in and social comparison. And how do they, how do they show up in grades and socially and in fashion and language, and are they cool, are they not cool? So they're getting a little bit of that. Now you add the hormones on top of it, and you put all these kids together inside a school in these hallways, and no wonder it's chaos. Because now we also have the added desire for a partner. Opposite sex, same sex, however that starts to show up for different kids. But and that starts to run high. So now how do we show up in comparison to others of our same sex or the opposite sex in competing for the attentions of those that we want? And so, these sex hormones kind of make all of that show up more and be a little more difficult. So estradiol is the chief estrogen. Females get more of it and boys get more of the testosterone, as we said. So these, again, for girls, it can be very emotional. For boys with testosterone, you put this into like a 12 or 13-year-old boy, and I might have shared I've heard this particular hormone called the it or kill it testosterone, hormone. And without a lot of that emotional regulation, that's still trying to be worked out, and all of that concern about where we fit, then you get this, and it's really hard. It's a wonder any of us survived it at all. So they're all in a big school together, fighting these hormones, and trying to compete with each other in many different ways, and then trying to become grown-ups, moving between that childhood and that grown-up world. It's huge. There's a lot going on. So puberty does set in, and now the onset, when does it show up? It can be different ages, of course. And for girls especially, body fat makes a difference. Heavy girls reach it sooner. Kind of average of must be about 100 pounds. And puberty tends to start earlier in the rural areas. If we were in class, I'd say why. Maybe somebody would give me some ideas. But the ideas can be that people in the cities are indoors more. Maybe they're not getting outside as much. Maybe they're getting more exercise in the rural areas. We're more indoorsy in the cities. Maybe not. Who knows? But that seems to be the trend that we see. As nutrition and medicine have improved, onset has been earlier overall. Some suspect the hormones that are in our meat, the steroids that are in our meat, adding to that system and then speeding it up. I don't know that it's a good thing to keep getting earlier with this. And we'll talk about some of those correlations. So, but think about this even. So body fat for girls tends to speed up puberty. And I'm going to cut this. We're not talking about that one. So body fat for girls, and then so we have in this all this competition with other girls. We have this need to attract people. Body image starts to play a part. So all of this gets combined emotionally to have sort of interesting impacts, difficult impacts for many. Think about if you're listening to me, if you were a girl, do you think that starting puberty early was a good thing for girls, like made them feel better about themselves, or was a harder thing for girls? Well, studies will show that it is a harder thing for girls, that it actually leads to greater depression. It's more difficult for girls to start puberty early. And so we're going to talk about a lot of the correlations in that. And so all of this is going to kind of run together. So we'll look at it separately first. So stress affects fertility. Now, when we think about getting pregnant, we'll hear that stress makes getting pregnant harder. So that's true. It can affect fertility. However, stress increases puberty hormones. So this can become a cycle when we're starting puberty. And interesting kind of research showing that puberty arrives earlier under more stress. Like if a child's parents are sick, addicted, or divorced, they live in a difficult neighborhood. And then they have found that for girls with harsh parents, puberty can come earlier. So now we have girls with more body fat, with maybe more stress. Potentially, these are all correlations. Not all scientists agree that stress causes early puberty. There can be a feedback loop here. If you start puberty early, and then that can cause stress, and then the stress causes more puberty hormones, so you get this big feedback loop. So it just emphasizes it, makes it stronger in terms of the desires and all those mood swings and things that come with it. So let's look at this one. This gives us some other correlations. Puberty onset is largely genetic. So we don't think about that honestly it's one of the biggest factors is genes. So let's look at all of these correlations. Early onset puberty correlates with early onset sexual activity. So genetically, the younger kids are going to get puberty earlier. They're going to maybe start having sex earlier. Early sex can lead to greater teen pregnancy. And then that person has a child who then is genetically coded for earlier puberty, which then correlates with earlier sexual activity, which correlates with earlier teen pregnancy. So it can lead to that cycle that we sometimes see. And then think about it, though, in terms of those girls that might, if that harsh parenting, here's the study. One longitudinal study, so they followed the children for a long time, of 756 children from infancy to adolescence found a correlation between earlier puberty and harsh parenting only in daughters. So those who cried a lot, so more difficult or temperamental babies, who that does sometimes correlate with harsher parenting, led not only to early menarche, but to increased sexual risk-taking. There are no other risks. So again, if we were in class, I would ask you why. Think about this. Girls who have had harsh parenting, who might be, cried a lot, maybe so didn't come out as self-soothers, and then maybe didn't get that modeling, and had harsh parenting, and then they get an early period, early puberty. But why else emotionally would these girls tend to risk-take sexually when they don't do any other kind of risk-taking? It's just sexual. So if we were there, we might come to the conclusion that they're looking for that attachment. They've got the estrogen, they've got the longing, they've got all of that. They don't have necessarily all of the emotional regulation going on. They don't have a lot of that internal self-confidence maybe. And then they look for the attachment, and so that can lead. And then there are correlations too with young parents and harsh parenting, because there is also going to be a correlation with stress and young parents, and then stress and more in harsher parenting. So we begin to see how all of that. All right, I have a dog barking. I have to pause this for a second. I'll be back in a minute, but you won't know the difference. So I'm back. You didn't know I was gone. So here I've talked about this. Early maturing girls tend to have lower self-esteem, more depression, and poorer body image than later maturing girls. Any of you out there that were early or late maturing, maybe you can stop and think about that for a moment and what it was like for you. Why is it hard for girls to be early maturing? Well, they're different. Girls in this time period as adolescents, we both want to stand out, be noticed, be chosen, but at the same time we want to fit in, and that can be difficult when you're trying to do both at the same time. So when you mature early, and then you're getting a lot of different kind of attention than everybody else, and maybe not the kind you're used to, and it can be uncomfortable. And you're getting attention maybe from older boys, because boys are going to mature later, and then that attention can create greater stress or also greater desire and so forth, and then you get that cycle moving. Now, early maturing boys are more aggressive, law-breaking, and alcohol abusing than later maturing boys. So you stick testosterone in really young boys, and it can wreak havoc in those ways. Slow developing boys tend to be more anxious, depressed, and afraid of sex. So there's more of a maybe embarrassment around it for boys to be later maturing. And so for boys, they want it to happen right at the right time. All of this is going to bring changes. This happens fairly young for when there's still so much other development going on. So let's talk about body image for a minute. This is, of course, think about that in high school, and this is huge as puberty comes to bear, and it rears its head, and everybody wants attention and so forth, and then that comparison continuing. So one reason for poor nutrition is anxiety about body image. Girls diet partly because boys tend to prefer thin girls. Boys want to look taller and stronger because girls value well-developed muscles in males. So everybody is playing peacock and strutting their feathers and trying to be noticed and comparing themselves to others. And unfortunately, in the high school hallways, some of it is so. Some of it's evolutionary, and some of it's the age and everybody trying to figure out how to fit in. So it can be tough. And of course, it can lead to eating disorders. I have a feeling these are probably familiar to you all, anorexia and bulimia. They can be very dangerous to our young girls, and it all goes to, and they can be very hard cycles to break once a girl is in it, in that cycle, because it has more to do with thinking than anything else, and it has more to do with self-perception and self-connection than anything. And so those are the things that have to change in order to break the cycle of eating disorders. Some studies have shown things actually like yoga work, and I think that yoga is helpful because it's very much about getting one comfortable with your body, and you have to kind of really be in your body, and it's about that acceptance of that, of where we are. Our society doesn't help a lot with the images that we give to young girls and young boys about what's sexy and attractive and so forth, and how we see ourselves begins to be defined by these images that are whatever it's called, paintbrushed and not real, or just a very, very small minority of the population that nobody can begin to compare with. And so what I like to tell students on this one is it's so important for our adolescents to work towards finding value in themselves, far beneath these things, because everybody's going to get old, hopefully. The goal is to get old. And when you get old, you're going to get wrinkles. And pounds aren't going to come off as easily, and hair is going to gray, and these things are going to happen. And your partner is going to age too. So better to have something much deeper than that, to find a value in yourself and others early on, and be a generation that promotes the idea that of something else being sexy. What we've done to the word beauty is devastating to me. Beauty hasn't always been about the external values that we sort of arbitrarily give to something, but about something much deeper than that. And so, to take beauty back would be my lesson on that one. All right, so if you want to take a break, I would take a break now. You can come back. This is going to be a bit longer. I'm going to go into neurological development of adolescence. So I'm going to keep going. Please pause in this, take time, read the screens, whatever you have to do to get through it. Okay, so neurological development. Different parts of the brain grow at different rates. So first we have that limbic system. Well, first we actually have, here's my little brain model. First we're going to have all those automatic systems that are online from the get-go, and then our limbic system is really growing, and that architecture of that is really growing through those first 2 years. And it matures before this part this prefrontal cortex that can inhibit impulsiveness and so forth, and that doesn't finish until the mid-20s. So in adolescence, it's still in its developmental stages. So instinctual and emotional areas develop before reflective ones. If you get a chance, watch this TED Talk about the mysterious workings of the adolescent brain. It's a good one, and she'll go through some of those things about how adolescents don't have the capacity, quite honestly, completely to take the perspective of other people as we get more in adulthood. And so that perspective taking can lead to a form of egocentrism in it. We also see, a lot of risk-taking in adolescence, and part of it is the prefrontal cortex isn't there to inhibit behaviors, and yet they're strong. I mean, our adolescents are 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds. That's as strong physically as you're going to be, maybe. And so we see, like in our sports stars, these young sports stars, they're fabulous at it because they're strong physically and fearless in some ways. And so a lot of that risk-taking happens in this time period, and some of it's good. Some of it's good, and some of it's really dangerous. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in class. When emotions are intense, especially when one is with peers, the logical part of the brain, shuts down. So we kind of get a little bit of a lid flip. The emotional, instinctual, impulsive parts can take over because we want to impress our peers. We want to fit in. That's more important to us than being logical and rational and being the dud of the group or whatever. When stress, arousal, passion, sensory bombardment, drug intoxication, or deprivation is extreme, the adolescent brain is overtaken by impulses. So we find that adolescents too, they will take much greater risks around their peers, that their strength in numbers, as I said, they don't want to get eaten. So they want to sort of fit in and be cool, and that limbic system is strong. What we also find, which is interesting in the adolescent brain, is that there is a drop in dopamine, but that things that cause excitement give really big kicks of it. So you need more and more to get those big kicks. And so that is a lot of that risk-taking in adolescence, is that wanting to get that thrill and to get those dopamine levels up. Too little dopamine was going to lead to depression, and too much of it can lead to too much risk-taking and impulsiveness. But if there's a natural drop in it at this time, and a real kick in our reward center, the reward center gets really big kicks in this time. And so then things that are exciting are really exciting, and then we want to do them again. So we get a limbic system unchecked by a developed prefrontal cortex, aroused by puberty hormones, loves intensity and excitement. Reactions are lightning fast due to increased myelination. Dopamine is very active. Now, it has a natural low, but then it has a big high when something happens, and so it's really strong. It's a highly creative time. We can become more prone to addiction because those reward centers are so strong and respond so strongly to things. And the brain is not fully developed, when they get attached to something, they need more and more of it for the kick that it's going to take to get that reward center going. And so addiction becomes then the habit that the brain seeks to get that high or feel better or whatever it's trying to do. Several aspects are positive. Increased myelination plus decreased inhibition equals increased reaction time. So they're quick and fearless. Synaptic growth enhances moral development, openness to new experiences and ideas. We get a little kick in moral development at this stage. But there's a lot of pruning that takes, we get another pruning phase in adolescence too. So I like the way Dan Siegel says this. We build the architecture, we build the foundation of the home in that 0 to 2 time period. In adolescence, we remodel it. So all of our experiences in adolescence are so important, and there's a big time for neuroplasticity in this, for remodeling the brain the way we want it to be. And so whatever those experiences are vital to really helping us become who we are. Okay, so that's brain. You may want to take another little break as I dip into adolescent thinking that we're gonna look at. So this is another good place for a break, and come back later. Okay. So adolescent thinking. All right, in our 2 to 6s, we saw the egocentrism that came from an absolute sort of neurological inability to take the perspective of others. Adolescents are still not great at this, not as good as we see if you watch that TED Talk as adults at perspective taking. But they've got a lot of other concerns going on. So they get this adolescent egocentrism that we're going to talk about. David Elkind was a big one for this, talking about different types of it. These are kind of fun to think about maybe now. Now that we're past high school, we can look back at these and see did they rule us at some point or another. So one of them that Elkind talks about is the personal fable. And you can read what it says there. When I think about this, it's kind of like in adolescence, everything is bigger, stronger, more intense than anything. So our first love, nothing may ever be quite like that again, because of this adolescent time period. It is the Romeo and Juliet of all love stories. You know, that first love is bigger than anyone has ever known love to be. The first breakup can be more heartbreaking than anyone has known to be. And in that, the personal fable is that belief in that adolescent that this is something nobody else has ever experienced, that they just don't get it. They don't get my life because this is, all that happens to me is completely unique. And I don't mean, because there are some things that are really hard in adolescence, and I'm not trying in any way, but that personal fable just says that they believe themselves to be much more uniquely special and socially significant to everyone than they are, that they're going to live a legendary life, and their life right now is legendary, one that nobody else could possibly understand. And then there's the invincibility fable, which comes a little bit with that risk-taking. Now, Dan Siegel would say that they don't see themselves as invincible, that they kind of know the risks, but they weigh them. So what this would say is, the fable is that they can't be overcome or harmed, right? So they can drive drunk, have unprotected sex, do high-speed driving, all of these things, and they won't get caught or hurt, or it won't happen. It's sort of that "it can't happen to me" idea. Now, Siegel would say that they actually have sort of a hyper awareness of these things, but like, so if there's a road and they're going to be like, I'm going to drive 100 miles an hour down this road. Now, if there's a 40% chance I'm going to crash, there's a 60% chance I'm not going, my odds are pretty good. And in the adolescent brain, where the adult brain might go, okay, I'm not taking that risk. The risks are too big. The adolescent brain will go, hey, statistics are on my side. I'm going to go for it, especially if I'm with my peers. They can get that kind of kick. So it can be good for them in some ways, but then again, this is when we get more addiction and more accidents that happen than for adults, because somewhat because of this. Imaginary audience, I would be shocked if none of us, if there's anyone that didn't have any of this. They tend to believe that everyone around them is as interested in their appearance and behavior as they are, that they are on stage, that everybody is watching them. I can't go to school, I have a zit on my nose. Everybody will notice it. It'll be in the yearbook. There'll be like a banner about it, outside. It'll go around on the PA system. I can't, I walk in and somebody else has this shirt on, but I think it looks better on that. I can't, I gotta go home and change. I'm having a bad hair day. Everybody's gonna notice. that we're kind of so significant in our personal fable that our imaginary audience is huge. So intense self-consciousness and self-scrutiny. But it also can lead to self-awareness, cultural sensitivity, and empathy, because we begin to realize, wow, that, they had, this poor girl has this big zit on her face. I know what that feels like. I feel bad for her. So it can, or somebody's going through something really difficult. I know what those things are. They're building more emotional, their console's getting bigger, their emotions are becoming more complex. So they can actually understand what's going on for others more. The truth is that some of this imaginary audience actually may exist. In high school, there's a real, especially early high school, huge social comparison thing still happening as we try to navigate that world of puberty and peacocking and everything else, and who's going to win. Unfortunately, that can happen. Now, Piaget's fourth and final stage of cognitive development, so that's sort of what we went through with Elkind. David Elkind, remember that name, David Elkind, was this adolescent egocentrism, and it's kind of a psychosocial more thing than actual cognitive, which is what we get in with Piaget. So Piaget's fourth and final stage is formal operational. So remember, we've had sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and now informal operational. What I'm going to say to you about this, okay, here's the big thing, hypothetical thought. So where our middle children were big with concrete logic, like they could see logic, but it's kind of, I got to see it to believe it, that inductive reasoning, I need all the proof before I can have the big picture. Hypothetical gives us the opportunity to ask what if, for possibilities that we can't see, to imagine something and then figure out how to make it happen, for more what we call deductive reasoning. So you begin with abstract ideas, things that maybe don't even exist, and then you can kind of figure out, go from there. You can teach them about gravity as an idea, and then give them all the things that make gravity so. So you can start with something, and this gives us where innovation and creativity come from, right? That ability to imagine and then bring into being things that have never been there before by figuring out how to do it. And this comes online a little more, this abstract hypothetical thinking in these later years. Now, the other one we would talk about in this is what we call a dual process model, that there are two different like processes in our brain, one for our logical thinking and one for our emotional thinking. And adolescents find it much easier and quicker to forget about logic. So even though they have the capacity for logic, because that PFC is not fully developed, and they, all this impulsiveness and risk-taking and peers and blah, 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 puberty, blah, they will choose the emotional more than the logical. Because, so the intuitive thought, I think the book they call it by many different names, intuitive versus analytic. So intuitive rises from an emotion or a hunch, beyond rational explanation, influenced by past experiences. It's quick and powerful. So it's going to be easier. It's sort of like having an opinion about something based on the heart and your ideas and your opinions, rather than, like, I'm sorry, my dog is going insane and I don't know why. Stop it. Stop. So they, they want to, they don't look at the pros and cons. Okay, he's going to have to sit on my lap. I'm sorry, guys. The pros and cons, the risks, the possibilities, that's a little more boring when you're an adolescent. And so even though they have the capacity, the other comes much easier, much quicker, and they use it more often. So have you ever tried to change someone's opinion about politics or religion? You can't do that with analytic. You can't do that with logical thinking. You can't do it, period. That's deeply sort of intuitive and feeling, a feeling nature thing. And so it's very hard to change someone's opinion once they've made it about something very strongly. Once an emotional decision has been made, people resist changing it. So then we have common fallacies. Mistaken belief that when a person has spent money, time, or effort that cannot be recovered, the sunk cost fallacy. I've already put so much time. It can be with relationships, it can be with classes, it can be with anything. I've already put so much into this that I can't leave it, that I have to stay, or else the time is wasted. base rate neglect, a decision is made on a personal basis rather than statistical information. So basically what this might be is that we don't believe we can get hurt without wearing a bike helmet until maybe it happens to somebody close to us. That to some extent we have to experience something. We can't just see a bunch of statistics and read a bunch of stuff about it. We have to experience it at some level, or it has to have some personal meaning to really get there. Okay, so that's all I'm really going to do right now. And that's been a lot. This is 35 minutes. I know that's long, guys. Hopefully by Tuesday you can watch all of it. And I'm just going to do we're going to do a Kahoot on it. So hopefully you will watch it. And Sachi says, hello. Sorry about him. He's being a pain. And I will see you Tuesday. You guys take care.